All right, perfect. So let's talk about muck and gut. So we're going to be going through mucking and gutting training today, specifically outlined from experiences and knowledge that we've taken from the past 20 years or so of AmeriCorps disaster response teams and all the compiled experiences that we've been able to put into a culmination of PowerPoint slides and really finding our path forward in setting some standard practices and setting some things that we find to be the most beneficial for our members out in the field, and specifically what we can do to continue to better ourselves as a AmeriCorps disaster response organization. So let's dive right into it. So for our training outline, we're going to be talking about mucking and gutting guide standards. We'll talk a little bit about decon and just some previews and safety protocols. Specifically, if we have some time, we'll dive into asbestos, but really we wanted to get a handle on mucking and gutting as Iowa is experiencing some severe flooding in a large proportion of the state. We wanted to provide this recording in a way that we can send it out and give those experiences to others. So I'm going to be reviewing a lot of this from the perspective of AmeriCorps safety standards, but really these safety standards can be just crossed into volunteer safety standards. We talk a lot about awareness and being a good steward of not only our branding, which is AmeriCorps, but just as a community, what we can do to really make sure that we're operating safely during times of disaster. So we have about an hour slated for this. So let's jump right into it. So as far as AmeriCorps Disaster Response Team and our expectations, really safety is the number one priority always and should be at the forefront of not only communication, but at the forefront of all of our practices. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the upcoming slides. But understanding that we want to be as risk averse as possible and hold each other accountable, operating within a place that is inherently a little dangerous. Anytime you're operating in a disaster zone, even on the image here, you can see that there are a lot of trees down, specifically for flooding. You know, we have to be aware of contaminants in those flood waters and really what that can leave behind, which comes in the form of mold and potentially some hardware in homes or hardware in the construction of just whatever buildings we're kind of working in that could have faltered based on the saturation of water from floods. So we want to make sure that we're always checking those studs and making sure that we're being safe when just operating in those zones. So we'll talk about some of those safety expectations and kind of what that looks like. We want to make sure that we're always communicating up the chain of command. This may not be the most pertinent for volunteer forces out there, but if you have a volunteer lead, making sure that you bring up any type of safety hazards or anything that you feel like operating in that zone may be making you uncomfortable. You want to bring that up to the person in charge, and having just one communicative voice is always very important in making sure that we're not bombarding somebody who's too high at the chain of command, all the way up at the chain of command, that maybe that information isn't the most valuable for them in that moment, and making sure that we're taking a look at who's leading, who's has a distinguishing factor that identifies them as a lead volunteer, or the person in charge of really the coordination of the response. So part of what we do is making sure that we are being good stewards of information and collecting data. So even as a volunteer, we want to make sure that we're signing in and out and making sure that as AmeriCorps disaster response team members, we're satisfying all reporting requirements for that day, making sure that we're cataloging everything that we've done so far in terms of debris removed, and everything that goes along with that, because we want to make sure that that information is being highlighted and making sure that we're part of the greater picture of disaster response. And really, in terms of AmeriCorps, we are one 8ART, always together. We are one AmeriCorps disaster response team. And even on disaster, even being a part of this greater uh, whole, as we are some of those parts, we are all in it together. And it is really part of the mechanism of disaster for us to have that branding and for us to really be within that space and making sure that we are communicating with each other, that we are understanding of one another and knowing that, we are one team and it is a separation of ego apart from the individual, and making sure that, when we're there, we're practicing our golden rules of flexibility, of communication, and most importantly, of respect with one another. Disaster is inherently very difficult. And once you're doing some very high intense activities, tempers could potentially flare, especially as you get a little bit more tired. So, just making sure that we're always on point and are really identified. It's easy to get lost in the fold, so we always wear our own high vis vests or have something that has specific visibility on our person. So whoever is out there coordinating efforts understands who we are, where we are, and exactly who we're representing. I'm not going to go really into these definitions, but it's just something for folks to have, and just I think some standards of what each of these activities are set by the Coalition of Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, which is NVOAD from the national level. So feel free to take a look at the end of this and just get a sense of some of the key points of these definitions. So today we're talking about mucking and gutting. And really the goal of a muck and gut operation is to get ourselves from point A to point B. We want to be that initial driving force into recovery efforts. We want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can in our power to move methodically and precisely into these homes, and removing anything that may have mold on it, that may have potentially saturated a lot of those floodwaters, that could be a risk to health for the individuals that are living in those homes still. Anything that the survivor is expressing to you that needs to be removed is something that should be removed. Now, it is not always the case that a survivor wishes everything to be taken from their property. Maybe they wish to save something that, in our person or our knowledge base, we know probably should be thrown away. That is not our place to force that upon the survivor. The best that we could do is provide that information on the safety risks or health hazards that may pose to a survivor. If they wanted to keep a couch, if they wanted to keep a painting that potentially is, porous, and has saturated a lot of just floodwaters. It is really all survivor centric, and that's part of really our entire disposition of making sure that we are doing everything in our power to protect the folks who have gone through this traumatic event. And with floods, it is very difficult because the floodwaters stay there. It takes a lot of time. It is a very slow moving disaster where trauma can really compound. In a tornado situation, the recovery efforts really, in response and recovery efforts, really begin right there. And for floods, it's difficult where you have an influx of volunteers, or you have an influx of teams, and they're ready to go, but the floodwaters haven't dissipated. So it's just something to be prepared for. And for us, we really want to get it to a standard of where they could bring in somebody to do mold remediation. For us, we do mold suppression. We use a chemical called Shockwave, which is an industrial standard. It really eliminates any mold growth that is present or within the pores of the wood. So we do it to the best of what that chemical capability can provide. But we never call it remediation, just based on conditions where if there is a hole in the roof, or There's moisture that was unaccounted for during that time. We don't know, and it's something that we want to make sure that we are, expressing that to the survivor where, hey, we're going to do everything to eliminate all the mold that is clearly visible or may become visible, but we can't guarantee that it's going to go away. So that's why we call it mold suppression opposed to mold remediation. But we really want to get it to that standard of what we call rebuild ready, right? We want to get it to where they're ready to put up new drywall, the house is completely aired out, all the moldy drywall is gone, all the carpet potentially is gone, all that soaked insulation, depending on how high the actual the water line was able to get into that specific property. And more than anything, when we do muck and gut operations, as silly as it can be with us donning our safety standard, which is Tyvek suits, or some may just view them as hazmat suits, we really provide that face of the response and recovery efforts. We connect with the survivors. We're able to provide a specific service to them at no cost, for us at least. And we're able to get them back on their feet. And with any volunteerism, with any AmeriCorps specific activities, we do not charge, and we do not do anything that would place a financial burden on a survivor. We want to make sure that we're getting them back to a place where any funds that they may receive, which in Iowa specifically, they have the opportunity of receiving, I think, about $5,000 from state individual assistance, and then whatever else comes through their FEMA claim for this specific federally declared disaster. So we, with the work, are trying to do as much as we can to instill hope in a community that has been devastated and has been ravaged by this specific disaster, which of course is a flood. And now we have essentially the entire northwest of Iowa really underwater. So this is just a before of some work in Hurricane Ida in New Jersey in 2021. This was a property that we had worked on, and just to give you guys a little bit of a more high pixel example of what a pre-muck and gut looks like, you can see it has a high water line. The drywall is completely blown away. There's a lot of muck. And just taking a look around, what do you guys see? What are some things that are sticking out to you? You can see that there's a lot of equipment down there, a lot of heavy items. Personally, I removed that treadmill, and that was one of the heaviest things I've ever picked up out of this specific property. And then this was a few days after. So this was a team out of Texas, and this is really what we like to view as our standard of rebuild ready. You can see all the studs are exposed, they've been scrubbed, they've been sprayed. Anything that may carry molds, we've tried to remove from this property. And just to give you guys a good visual again, you could see the water down there, all that muck, that sludge, all of this drywall that is just completely exposed and moldy, and then getting it to a point where they're able to go back in. And this specific individual, they had their utilities shut off because the actual engineer wasn't able to get to the panels because of how much muck was down there. And after we cleared it back, they were able to turn utilities back on, or at least work on them appropriately, and they were able to return to their property shortly after. So really for us, you can see some safety standards already with our personal protective equipment. We have our boots on that are waterproof, and they're sealed and duct taped, and we're wearing our respirators with hard hats, just making sure that we're completely protected from our AmeriCorps disaster response team standard. For some golden rules during our muck and gut operations, again, we want to make sure that safety is the number one priority. I talked about this before, but we want to respect the homeowner's wishes. We want to make sure that survivors are being protected and they are not being re-traumatized by removing any items that they did not wish to be removed. We want it to be an open flow of communication with the survivor. Hopefully they are on site with us when we do a preliminary assessment, or we have a continued flow of communication that maybe they change their mind, they want to keep something that they feel is salvageable. We want to make sure that we're kind of working through these things. We want to keep in mind that they are trauma survivors, and whatever they may be experiencing is nothing against us. It's something that they're going through themselves, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power uh, to really ensure that they are getting to that next stage of help, right? Of everything that may be harmful for them in this property is taken out again in a methodical and precise manner, right? We don't want to go in there. We don't want to just be swinging sledgehammers and really taking pry bars and crowbars to whatever we see. We want to make sure that everything is outlined, everything is specifically talked about before we go and we approach and we start to remove these materials and remove these items. And we always want to keep in mind that these are trauma survivors. I'm sure everybody can think about their worst day or their worst day with Mother Nature, and really specifically knowing yourself and your own personal emotions and what it takes to kind of work through something like that. And now this is kind of the reality of these survivors. They're working through this on a daily basis. They're receiving multiple calls from insurance claim agents, other nonprofits, other NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And we are one of many who are trying to support them. And we really just need to understand patients and understand that perspective of survivors. So one of our standard golden rules. And as I continue and as I just discuss some of these practices, these really stay pretty consistent throughout. We want to make sure that everybody is feeling safe and that they are communicating with their team lead. They are elevating any concerns up the chain of command. If there's anybody on the ground that is there with you, if there's a volunteer coordinator, making sure that you are communicating with them and understanding that it's always okay to walk away if you are feeling uncomfortable about something or an activity that you just don't feel safe doing. It's always fine to say no. Again, we are doing deconstruction, not demolition. We are methodically approaching a home and making sure that we, as we go in there, are in the same manner, taking out what needs to be taken out and not demoing a home. As I'm sure, as attractive as it may be to just wildly swing a sledgehammer, a disaster is not the place to really have that freedom. If anything, as I'm sure anybody who's watching this recording or who is on the call has done any of these activities, you could do more positive good with a tiny pry bar than you can with a sledgehammer. And you could be way quicker, way more efficient, and actually be able to do a lot of things that you just can't do with a pry bar. I mean, with a sledgehammer. So again, it's that deconstruction, not demolition. And like I said, we are one team with a goal. We look out for each other. We make sure that we're taking into account our mental, emotional, and physical health. Disaster is no place to try to be a hero, as we like to call, right? Like that hero syndrome. You are operating in a time that really is a marathon and not a sprint. And if you act like you're running a 100-yard dash in a marathon, you're going to burn yourself out before you even get to the first leg of the race. So we want to make sure that we're looking out for each other while we're out there, taking into account any signs of potential heat stress, any signs of emotional distress or physical distress. Even if you're working with somebody who you haven't worked with before, just keep an eye on each other and just make sure that you're being vigilant on anything that may be arising in that moment. So again, those are our golden rules or standards as we kind of walk through our mucking and gutting operations. Just know that every aspect of what I discussed today is really keeping these in mind, which is safety, the respect of the survivors, making sure that we're approaching homes in a methodical manner and doing deconstruction and not demolition, and that we really are one team operating through this disaster response. We want to make sure that we're looking out for each other and watching each other's backs while we're out there. It's easy to get into a mode where you're just kind of uh, in the same cycle, or you're really into your current activity and you may not know that there's a potential hazard about to affect you. So it really helps when you have an entire team looking out for one another and really looking over your own shoulder and making sure that they're safe as well. So let's get into the basic principles of mucking and gutting. So I talked about a few, and just kind of understanding what that looks like and understanding certain aspects of really what muck and gut brings. Mucking and gutting can be dangerous work if proper steps are not followed, right? This is something that we try to continuously teach on, something that we continuously bring up, and making sure that we have the opportunities to do just-in-time trainings like these. But really, if we're just going free-form and we're not following the proper steps that we need to deconstruct a home, it can be dangerous work. You never want to pull out the floor before you start working on ceiling drywall, because what's going to be down there? Nothing. And that makes very, very dangerous work area. Remember again that mucking and gutting is the methodical deconstruction. We really try to hit this point home that we're not just demolishing someone's home, we're trying to remove the damaged materials and things that we actually have discussed with the homeowner, um, with the survivor, that needs to come out or they want to come out. It is completely within their right to save whatever they want to save. It is not in our right to tell them uh, or to force upon them certain aspects of what need to be removed. And if you think about a house, when it comes to cabinets or appliances, we're going to be removing and deconstructing things in the reverse order as you would imagine them being installed. So, what's the last thing that usually goes into a home? If you've moved into a brand new apartment, a brand new townhouse, a brand new house, whatever it may be, um, that one of the first things you put in there are new appliances. If you don't have any cabinets there, you put some cabinets in, bookshelves, right? Anything that is a mobile kind of vanity or an essential thing that you would put into your home or your living area following you moving in. So as we are doing our mucking and gutting, we are going to be removing those things in the reverse order. So some of the first things that would come out are fridges, anything that may be blocking areas of egress or entrance. We want to make sure that we have our walking channels clear. And let me tell you, if you've ever been in a home or if experienced a long-term power outage yourself, the first thing that you want to do is really get rid of that stinky fridge or that stinky deep freeze, because God knows what is inside of there at this point, depending on where you really are accessing that fridge. I've smelt some smells on just the last time Iowa experienced some deep flooding, which was in 2019, where we came in 5 months after the disaster, and some of those smells were just unimaginable. So, reverse order and making sure that we are working again, as I had talked about, from the top down and the back to the front. So, we're not creating any unnecessary mess or extra work for ourselves, right? So if you think about it, you never want to start ripping out flooring from the entrance, right? Because once you get to the back, you've essentially froze yourself. You have no opportunity to work your way back out if you ripped out flooring, because now you're just walking on joists, and that is a complete no-go. We want to make sure that we are operating safely and we are following our basic principles when we're operating in a muck and gut in a disaster zone. One thing that I always point out before we even approach a home and we even go through our preliminary assessment processes is making sure that we check placards. Many times after a natural disaster, engineers will come through, city engineers will review homes, and if they deem anything that is unsalvageable or has been severely damaged to the degree that the structure is too dangerous to even be inside of, you'll typically see placards that express this, like red tags, yellow tags if it's been moderately damaged, but is still habitable, and green tagged if it's just been minorly damaged. So just make sure you look up your local municipality placards as you're working through a disaster. So porous versus non-porous. As you can imagine, as the name states, porous items, really those items that have the ability to have that flood water absorbed into them. They have pores. They are porous, like cloth, wood products, soft plastic. They should be discarded always, because whatever was in the contaminants in that floodwater are ideal for mold growth. We don't know what was in that floodwater. If it was above the line, right? So anything below the water line that was porous probably should be thrown out, or should be thrown out. And then anything that's above the water line that was still in the affected area, make sure you inspect it and check with the survivor if they would like for it to be saved. A lot of times we have survivors just say, everything in this room I just want gone. I don't care what's inside of it. It was sitting here with flood water for X amount of days. I just want it out of here, which is completely in their right, or vice versa. They want to inspect every item. And again, that's completely in their right as well. But really just know that any porous items below a water line probably should be discarded, dependent on what was down there, specifically to cloth or wood products or soft plastics. Any non-porous items can be salvaged at the homeowner's discretion, and that's glass, ceramics, metal, hard plastic items. These are things that can be cleaned, washed through, maybe power washed, disinfected, and then air dried. And this is, again, something that we want to discuss with the homeowners, and making sure that we get their permission before we get started. And just some examples, again, of some of these porous building materials. We have your carpet, we have your drywall, any type of plywood or any of these soft woods, right? Ceiling tiles. If they were below the water line, they most likely need to be removed as expeditiously as possible, as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that we're removing them and really establishing a safe place for a survivor or for whoever's home this is. But really, for our purposes, these are the porous building materials that we'll encounter like 90% of the time. For a typical one-person crew, right, we have just some list of tools here. You can see that all of the work that was done on the left-hand side there in the top left-hand picture, where we have our AmeriCorps disaster response team sitting outside of a home with probably about 4 or 5 feet of trash lined up and a pretty great width. All of the tools that are on the right laid out on that tarp went into doing everything on the left. So you can see just a kind of a standard tool list that we have set here. You're not going to necessarily need everything for every site that we go out, but it's just good practice to have a few of these, or just consistently having a pack like this. You can see some crescent wrenches, some push brooms, some scoops, some pry bars, crowbars, chalk line. You have some box cutters and some sharper knives to make sure that we're getting rid of drywall when things are kind of occurring, and making sure that we have this all stocked. Some standard PPE, as you can see here, at least for our AmeriCorps disaster response team standards, we have our hard hats, we have our Tyvek suits, we have our respirators with P100 filters, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We have eye protection, reflective vests, ear pro, work boots. Whatever environment that you're walking into, some of these will potentially change, like rubber boots. compared to cloth or suede boots if you're stepping into a place that may have some standing water, or if you're doing mold suppression and you're using any type of chemical-based items, you want to make sure that you are wearing goggles with splash protection. So for our AmeriCorps disaster response teams, we use Tyvek suits. We use the Tyvek 400 series, which is chemical splash proof. Um, is something that we use as a consistent standard because it has the utmost protection when operating in areas like this. Painters' coveralls do not offer the same protection, and they are not suitable for a standard mucking gut. And taking off that splash or taking off that potential contamination from mold or insulation or whatever may be present in the area. Tyvek suits really protect and prevent muck and any of the spores from getting on your skin or clothes. We want to make sure that everybody is completely protected as to the utmost of our abilities, which is why we use these. As you can see, if we're wearing gloves and we have those taped up and we have a closed loop on our boots, and we're wearing a half mask respirator, and we're wearing, other type of particulate filters, there's really not that much surface area for anything to get on you, if at all. So when we're doing these, we should really only be wearing them once a day. On a standard mucking gut assignment, maybe you might go through 2 a day or 3 a day, depending on the area that you're working in. And that's really based on if a suit will rip or something will kind of compromise your suit. Otherwise, if you don't have any rips or tears, that suit can be worn all day. And we'll talk about how to remove them to ensure that you can kind of work through your day with them. Um, but if you're traveling or you need to go somewhere like the restroom, these suits are completely disposable and they should be disposed. So making sure that you never step into a vehicle in what we call a hot suit, and making sure that those areas stay completely clean of any type of contaminants, so you guys can stay as safe as possible. We may put in some standard practices just based on what our budgets are looking like for disaster response, but mainly we want to make sure that we're being as safe as possible, specifically if we are in the presence of volunteers, offering them these suits or having them provided for them as well. Talked a little bit about this, but making sure that our eye protection, there are many technological revolutions these days, like anti-fog goggles or anti-fog goggle solution. And whether it necessarily works or whether it really works, I guess, uh, subjective based on your own personal opinion, I think. But for the most part, some of these new anti-fog goggles really do wonders. And if we're doing anything that involves any type of potential splash hazards, we really want to make sure that we have them, and we even have the potential to bring in face shields if needed. But goggles, and you can see one of our AmeriCorps members are getting suited up with a half mask respirator on their Tyvek suit and beginning processes of uh, putting on that PPE. We want to make sure that as we're working, we're wearing our safety glasses, and we're making sure that we're avoiding any type of adjustment as much as possible to avoid any contact with our eyes. As you can see here, this individual is tasked at suiting everybody up and suiting everybody down. And that's a really good standard of practice, as if somebody needs to um, adjust their eyewear or adjust their mask, they could come out and they could have somebody with clean hands help and protect them. These are the filters that we use. Standard P100 filters is our highest level of filtration, no pun intended, of making sure that we have really the materials that will filter out all of the potential particulates that go through there, right? So It is 99.999% of particulate filtration, and you can see it rated on each one of your masks or whatever you're using. That's really upfront the standard. We use 3M for smell particulates as well, as you can see there. You can always look up whatever you are about to use. And you can see a safety data sheet online if you have the capabilities, or you can ask whoever is in charge on some of those standards and making sure that everybody is really protected and is being safe. You should be able to breathe uh, freely as you guys are working. If you feel like you are short of breath, or you feel like you are experiencing something that is something blocking of air, it's either your filters are dirty or something is wrong with your mask in terms of tightness. You should always be able to breathe freely. Obviously, it's a little bit of a change, but you should really have that free flowing air coming in. For proper protective footwear, we always do steel toe. We look for gloves that are slash resistant or something that is going to withstand a certain type of abrasion. Nitrile or latex gloves we wear underneath our actual work gloves for an added layer of protection. And trust me, if you're picking something up that may have remnants of water or any type of moisture, it feels really nice knowing that you have that added layer of protection. We recommend hard hats, typically, depending on the activities that you guys are going to be doing inside of an affected property, but making sure that we're providing an appropriate amount of personal protective equipment. You never know if ceiling tile is really moldy and it'll drop and hit you in the head, or if there's anything else that may be a bump hazard. We want to make sure that we're operating as safely as possible and we have a proper fit of our hard hat, allowing us to work in the area. If there's any accidents that occur on site, obviously use best judgment in the moment, but we want to assess the injury. We want to make sure that that is communicated to the team lead or their supervisor or the volunteer supervisor, and making sure that we're doing the best that we can to ensure that that is a safe area. Uh, if we need to move an individual, we can do that, but making sure that if it is something of a severe nature, we're calling 911 and seeing what we can do to ensure that that individual gets the best care as possible. So always feel free to report accidents or hazards and have that chain of communication move forward. This is just a list, some of our consumable supplies that we use on a pretty standard basis. I won't go too much into it, but if you feel like you have a certain degree of airflow in your suit, or something is, popped open, um, you can use duct tape in a pinch, but more times than not, it's just better to get a new Tyvek suit depending on the severity of the rip or tear. Obviously, if you have a substantial tear, just get a new suit. But just as an idea, and just giving you guys kind of a wide swath of some of these consumable things that we use on a pretty consistent basis. So some team leader tasks before starting a Muck and Gutt. Just as a bullet point approach, we want to communicate with the homeowner or the survivor to inform them of ADART's PPE policy. We want to talk to them about why we wear Tyvek, um, why we're wearing masks, why we're wearing, personal protective equipment. It's nothing against them. It's nothing against their property. It's just our own safety standards. And 99.999% of the time, the survivor completely understands. And they know. And a lot of times we end up gifting them, our own PPE or their or PPE for them to kind of work in our area, or if they're still picking things up or scoping out what they would like to be salvaged. Um, Now they are protected to the utmost of that filtration. So we want to make sure that we're reiterating a walkthrough or completing a walkthrough. You want to get a sense of what needs to be accomplished in that property, asking what needs to be salvaged, and making sure that first and foremost we are identifying any potential hazards. We are working to identify some more safety data sheet guidelines on asbestos, especially here in Iowa, and hopefully being in contact with the DNR at some point. Before we set up a mucking gut, we want to establish a hot, warm, and cold zone and identify a decon person or a decontaminant person. They're going to be working to remove suits and remove hard hats and masks to ensure that we have the utmost safety and nothing is getting into your airways or your eyes or anything that may potentially affect you negatively. Something that we do for a safety standard practice that ends up being a good stamina saver and a good just protective saver. We break up into two groups, and we have a group go in for 30 minutes, and they work to the best of their ability and clean up before they leave. And then we have that group come out, and then another group go in for another 30 minutes. So the work never stops, but people are getting breaks, and we found it is a great and efficient way to kind of work through a property. We want to make sure that we're turning off utilities, electric, water, gas, and we want to make sure that every time we go back to that property, we're checking to ensure that the utilities are continued to be turned off or continued to be off. You never want to go back to a property and then touch a live wire or potentially accidentally touch a live wire, and then you have 110 volts running through you, and that is not a great day. So these are just some images of some previous Iowa mucking guts from Southwest Iowa. This is a property near Shenandoah that our teams worked on at the time. So you can see we have teams taking stuff down, cleaning it up, and then removing it as they go. So the methodical deconstruction of a home. So let's go into some utilities and just let's talk about certain aspects of what we do as we're going into a home or a property. We want to make sure that the electric is shut off. We want to identify that breaker and identify one person who's going to be in charge of the electric. Typically, the team lead. We want to make sure that they are the only one tasked with turning this on and off per day. You don't want 5 people thinking that it's their responsibility to turn off or on the electric. That's how accidents tend to happen. And make sure that you identify any potential lockout tags or things that should be locked out so things aren't started back up again until the completion or maintenance. You want to make sure that the water is shut off. There's nothing worse than working on a property and you accidentally hit a very rusty pipe. And you now have a complete flow of water running into a basement or running into a home. We want to make sure that water's shut off in the same way as everybody, or potentially you've had the opportunity of shutting off some water. And if it is straight through, that water is flowing. If it is perpendicular, that water is off. We want to make sure that you guys have everything really taken care of before you actually start up any type of mucking gut activities, just to ensure that we are eliminating any potential recourse of damage that could go towards that survivor. We don't ever want to cause additional financial strain. We want to make sure that everything is nice and tight and locked before we actually end up starting. So just make sure you locate the main water shut-off valve. A lot of times survivors will tell you exactly where they are. If you haven't thought about where it is in your home, maybe it's a good time to find out if you've never had to do that. So gas shut off, same thing, right? So it's facing away, it's off, facing through, it's on. Typically, you could always find the gas shut off, right? We do, in many areas, already have most of the gas shut off. That comes pretty basic from utilities or the gas companies. We never want to turn that gas back on if it's off. We want to make sure that it is staying off and that it is up to the survivor to contact the gas company after we move on from their property. We never want to turn something on that a utility company has deemed unsafe to turn back on. Talked about this before. We want to make sure that we are removing furniture and large appliances first before we actually go into mucking and gutting. As you can see here, many fridges. We never want to open a refrigerator. If you think that you have enough duct tape on a fridge, you probably don't. Like this one, I always take a look at the third fridge from the left in this picture down here. And that just needs so much more duct tape, so much more duct tape. We want to make sure that we're taking that out to the curb and that we never open them. Countertops and cabinets, if they're made of wood or covering any drywall, they need to go. Just make sure you talk to the homeowner or the survivor rather. You want to make sure that, a lot of times we'll have a conversation that we're on the same page of, hey, we're going to remove this. This is porous and has the potential to, continue to build mold or have that mold growth. And they'll, maybe it's cabinets or trim or items that have been passed down and they don't want it removed. So it's completely, again, in their right to keep that and to make sure that, we just provide them with as much safety information on the risks of keeping that in their property as possible. But we don't pry, we don't push. It's completely up to them. We give them the information. Same thing with electric stoves. We want to make sure that they're off. And if there are any wires that need to be taken out from the back, a lot of times they just have some grounding wires that are connected back there. We want to make sure that, again, before we do anything, that power's off. And we want to make sure we cap any live wire or any exposed wires as we kind of go out there. If we have electrical tape, it works just as well. Just making sure that there's no exposed wires as we begin to remove certain things. In the same breath of removing washers and dryers, right? These can get a little tricky, right? They have the capacity to be saved, but a lot of times homeowners just do not want the hassle. They really want our assistance with removing them, just depending on what they feel like uh, the uh, the effort it's going to take to actually end up washing this. Um, and I see your question answer. I'm going to just go back a second. So the cabinets, right? For here, it is completely up to them. I mean, if it is wood cabinets and let's say the water line was even just right below the cabinets, there's still a lot of moisture in the air, and there's still a lot that could potentially latch onto that with the spread of mold, right? If you have a little bit of mold in a place, you probably have a lot of bit of mold. And we just want to make sure that we're providing them as much information as possible, right? So if they're below the water line, we're ripping them out, and that's exactly what happened here. You can see kind of just where the cabinets used to be down there. So just providing them that guidance, but if it's below, they definitely need to go. That was not my intention to make that rhyme. So as we're removing washers and dryers, they have the capacity to be saved, right? It's completely up to them. A lot of times survivors don't want to clean them and get them back to a restorative fashion. There's a lot of long-term recovery groups that can provide them with a brand new one, so it's not worth the hassle a lot of times. But if you've ever had to install or remove a washer machine or a dryer, for a washing machine typically have a hot and cold line running through them, and they have an excess hose or drainage hose. We just want to make sure that we are taking these out. It's always great to have a bucket or some kind of trap next to you in case there's any residual waters, wa in case there's any residual water in these supply lines. Um, it is a very unfortunate thing to pick something up like this, and then have a lot of just remnant floodwater splash on you. It is not a fun time. So make sure that everything that you are removing has already been drained or taken out. There is a very nifty invention called a red solo cup that we've used on disaster to remove the water from sinks, from washers, from dryers, whatever has the capacity to hold water. Good old fashioned red solo cup does the trick a lot of the time. So removing sinks. A lot of times we have to do this to get to the drywall that's behind it, or depending on kind of what the structure of the sink is. We want to make sure that the water is off. We want to locate the supply lines behind the sink and turn off the shutoff valves, turn off the water supply. You can always test the faucet, and I highly recommend testing the faucet before you take a sink out. And then we can begin to disconnect some of those supply lines from the sink. So this is my favorite sentence of disconnect the drain pipe from the sink by unscrewing the plastic slip nut and removing the P-trap in the U-shaped part. So I put in a diagram here, or an example exactly of just kind of having to remove this, right? Um, you can see here that this is probably a kitchen sink. You have a garbage disposal here, but really remains the same. You have your supply lines and you have your traps that you're taking out. Having a pan is so essential underneath. And the same thing when we're removing toilets. We want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to ensure that um, it's something that should be removed, right? If the tile around it is cracked, or if it's just completely, just a loss from the homeowner's perspective, the survivor's perspective, it should be removed. We want to turn off that valve on the water supply line. We want to make sure that we're emptying out that tank in the back, which is always a very fun time to forget that there's moisture back there or potentially still holding flood water. So we use a cup, take it out, and then we start disconnecting the water supply lines kind of in the same fashion. We want to unscrew those bolts. We want to pick up the toilet and remove it, and unscrew and remove the toilet flange. Typically, each toilet has a one-use wax seal in the drainage hole, and that is, again, just a one-use. So as soon as you get to the point where it's time to take it out, feel free to remove it, and it is only like $1 or $2 or a couple dollars at the hardware store. So something to just be aware of, that you never want to continue to use the same wax gasket there. So you can see here, just removing the supply lines, the water lines, and removing the toilet as you kind of work through, and making sure that everything is dry and not holding any moisture. So let's talk about removing baseboard and trim. You want to make sure that we, again, to get to drywall, a lot of times we have to get through some of these aesthetic design pieces, and even just baseboard and trim helps keep that drywall in place and typically hides seams for flooring. So we want to make sure that we remove this before starting to try to rip out drywall. We can potentially cause more damage or more harm than we intended to, and it's something just to be aware of. It could also be a pretty big health hazard, and making sure that you don't, try and rip out something that's pretty flexible, and then all of a sudden you create a springboard that could hit somebody in the head. So we want to make sure that we're removing any baseboards or trims around doors or drywall before we start removing them. You can see the jams. Doors are pretty easy to take out if you know kind of the outlining parts. Doors usually have a pin in the hinges that you could just pop out with a Phillips head screwdriver and a hammer, and then you're able to just kind of take that out, so you're not having to kind of fight around a door as you're trying to get rid of these jam casings. So typically those are one piece, but just take a look at your door, notice any seams, and you can go along with just taking some of that stuff out. It's best, right? If we take this process slow, these pieces are really fragile after, and a lot of times their survivors would like them to be saved because they're antique or they have some kind of sentimental value with the home. We want to make sure that we're taking it slow. They're fragile. We want to make sure that we're still asking the survivor just based on um, what we need to um, kind of remove. It's best if you kind of see where the nails were shot in and slowly apply pressure and kind of work your way into popping that out. In most cases, just make sure that you're checking with the survivor before ever discarding any type of item. So you can see here just some examples. A lot of times our jams are painted over. So, just as a starter tip of just scoring those seams goes a really long way. And as you can see here, this individual is using a putty knife and a pry bar to kind of just go through slowly and methodically and kind of popping out that jam in the baseboard. And then always make sure to remove the nails or pop them out because you never want any potential puncture hazards. So you can see here drywall standards. We are on our way in this picture of a section of drywall that is removed, probably say about like 4 feet or so, but we have some remnants of some drywall still on those seams. So when we're removing drywall, we want to be very precise, methodical, and really stress that any remaining drywall, or if we remove drywall in increments that are not up to construction standards, it is going to cost the survivor more money to replace it. And again, it's up to the survivor to tell us how much they want removed. A lot of times, we talk to them about how far we should actually remove it, and they're like, please just fucking gut the entire room. So again, they're right, but we want to make sure that we have that conversation before. Drywall typically comes in 4x8 sheets and varying kind of widths. But I think the most important thing when understanding this is that just straight, clean lines are very important for future replacement. A lot of times, just and recovery, construction. In construction, they might charge more for removing, like previous drywall or anything that may be remnants. We want to make sure that we're cleaning up those pieces, so contractors can't charge for that additional cost. So just a diagram for folks to understand exactly kind of where drywall is at and what those standards are. You'll have drywall on your ceiling, right? And then you have as a framed wall, you have your studs, your bottom plate, you have your subfloor, depending on kind of where you're at. So you hang your first piece of drywall, and you essentially end up staggering it for just more structural safety of the entire wall. So just kind of knowing where you're at when actually removing drywall, and making sure that we're being, again, as precise and methodical as possible. So just some steps, making sure that we're taking a look at where we need to remove the drywall from, wall to wall. Typically what we'll do is we'll measure the desired height, and we go by increments that would be easy for us to replace: 2 foot, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot. We take a measurement, we get a line, and then we make sure that we are snapping a level chalk line across that entire width. So it's good if you take different points of measurement as you're walking down a wall to make sure that each point is going to be pretty standard with, 2 foot or 4 foot. And sometimes you might have a bowed floor, or you might have a house that's not entirely square. So just finding kind of the perfect measurement, I think, just based from what you ended up seeing with that specific property. The same thing, something I always have to remind myself of is making sure that I take any outlet coverings out. I always feel like outlet covers are part of the actual electrical plug, and that's not the case. So we want to make sure that the power's off. We're taking out the covering casing, and we're not taking any chances with any exposed electrical wires that we already removed. All trim, which includes baseboards, shoe trim, door and window trim. Sometimes you think that a baseboard doesn't have shoe trim because it just looks like an ornate piece of baseboard. Just make sure that you're taking into account that they may have multiple pieces holding it in together. And as cleanly as possible, please, please, please check if your utility blade is sharp. It is not going to do you any good to use an old, rusted utility blade that has cracks. Most utility knives, most box cutters, most cutters in general, they have fresh utility blades inside of the actual casing of itself. And it really is just tied in with like a Phillips head screwdriver. So before you do any cutting, make sure your blade is sharp. Try it on some derelict piece of drywall outside of, if it's already been taken off, or just take a look at it. It's pretty easy to tell sometimes if a blade is sharp or not. Um, Same thing goes with insulation. We're cutting it just kind of where the drywall is cut. We want to make sure that we're, saving again as much money as possible for that specific homeowner, and we're trying to remove any nails or screws or studs from studs that may be holding in potential mold spores or anything that may be a potential hazard for us. And we can either do that by removing them, we can hammer them in, or bending protruding nails or screws before actually taking them out. So just to give an example of potential drywall, just construction here, just some things for you guys to consider. We have more times than not corner bead for drywall corners. So we have metal or potential plastic bead here, and it's really easy to forget. And as you're trying to remove some drywall, uh, this can be pretty difficult for you to remove any other panels if you haven't already taken this off. Just know that a lot of times there are interesting segments of drywall that need to be gone through, for windows or panels or whatever, anything else that you might encounter, and just having that be specifically outlined before, or getting an idea of how drywall really interacts with the home is just a good practice for folks. So all in all, this should be really what it looks like afterwards. And understanding that all things are clean, dusted off, all potential nails are taken out. They probably are already kind of working on drying this home back out, but should really look like it is a new construction home at the end of your Muck and Gutt, and ready to have new drywall be placed on it. So just some other possible encounters as you're doing some mucking and gutting. So here you can see someone making a line, multiple points of measurement, just making sure that they know that um, this is exactly where they're taking it out and where they're slashing their line. Fire blocks may be on studs, so it's horizontal pieces of studs the slow the movement of fire as it works its way up a home. I never knew what that was when I started construction. Insects, believe it or not, there may be spiders or other bugs in studs. In Southwest Iowa, when we were mucking down there, we found frogs and snakes when we were mucking and gutting. So every drywall piece that we removed ended up having like a snake or a frog. There may be dead vermin potentially. There may be other debris. You just would blow your mind how much other stuff is left as somebody continues to build your home. We found other panels, more drywall, bricks, we've seen it all when it's come to mucking and gutting. So just something to be aware of, and just know that there may be other sharp screws or nails when we go through and we're actually taking things out. A lot of times they'll nail in tiles, and that may be protruding through some of the drywall, or depending on where you're at in the home. And yeah, and plaster keys potentially just left over during that time as well. So for our purposes, we these are some floors that we may encounter, which is hardwood or laminate. We may pry these up with a crowbar or hammer, just kind of depending on where we're at and what we have. Carpet will always need to be removed, and it becomes quite heavy when it's been saturated with water, and we want to make sure that we're cutting that into strips and taking that out. Ceramic tiles are made to withstand water. It's completely up to the homeowner on what they want. But if you feel soft spots, if you feel a dip, the subfloor is probably compromised and it needs to be removed. Be very careful with vinyl flooring. There's a lot of new vinyl flooring. But if there are essentially tiles that look like they were from the 1980s with very hot pink colors or just neon colors. Those are probably asbestos tiles, and we'll take a look at that later. So just know that every floor is going to be different, and as folks go through and they pull up floors and they put on floors, there's a lot of potential for that to continue, and you may have layers of subfloors as you're mucking and gutting. So just a few more slides here. So showers and tubs, prefab showers and tubs need to be removed to get to the drywall in the back. Easy to cut up based on if you measure down from the bottom and measure your way up. If you do an increment of drywall or you're working in increments of drywall, you could do a foot above that, right? Or wherever that main line and you can remove that. So I've attached YouTube videos on each of these, so you can watch at your leisure. But these tubs and prefabricated tubs and showers may be removed without power tools, but it can, if they do not want to save them, it is a very easy thing to kind of just rip down. And so curbside debris removal for most municipalities, they're going to want it separated into these sections, which includes construction and demolition materials. So that's why we try to bag as much insulation and drywall as we can, so we could bring that out to the curb. White goods like microwaves, refrigerators, ovens, water heaters, those appliance type items, we want to separate those. Vegetative debris, a lot of times municipalities will not pick up any vegetative debris if it looks like it has siding or roof tiles or anything that may be dangerous to composting that or to breaking that down. And then our hazardous materials, we want it separated. So just as an idea, kind of a FEMA standard set by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Right, you have your construction debris bagged up, separated, vegetative debris, hazardous materials. And a lot of times it's good to make sure where the local municipality is asking items to be placed. They may not pick up if it's too far back onto a property line, and they'll only pick up just based on where we placed it on the actual terrace and the actual curb. So just to wrap up, we want to make sure that for safety and best practices, we're aware of our surroundings. We want to make sure that we're always taking a look at what's around us and what potentially could be a hazard or is a risk. We want to remove debris as it's torn down. We don't want to leave any cleanup for the end as we're working. We want to make sure that we're cleaning it up. We want to bag as much debris as possible, which is going to be a big lift or an alleviation of a lift for a homeowner or survivor. We want to remove any screws or nails that are exposed. We want to make sure that there's no potential hazards when a homeowner steps back in there. We want to make sure that we're always practicing proper lifting procedures. and keeping walkways clear. We always want to make sure that we're taking the utmost of discretion when it comes to safety, and always communicating and making sure that we're kind of shouting things out as we're working through a site. It's always good to just make sure that we're staying on top of our safety practices, which includes hygiene. So we're working in pretty mucky and gross environments, and we want to make sure that we're always washing our hands before we eat or before we end up touching certain things, that may like food or water, or anything that we may be ingesting. We don't want to potentially spread any type of cold or sickness based on if we're sharing, water or, anything of that nature. We always want to make sure that we shower after we muck and gut, making sure that we wear deodorant or whatever you consider antiperspirant, or just anti-smell, and making sure that we are washing our hands. So, just a quick example before wrapping up that most asbestos tiles look similar to this in a fashion of similar size, which is 9 by 9 tiles, which include these very carnival-esque, right? These marbly-esque, Saved by the Bell fashions. And if you ever encounter something like this, chances are that it's asbestos, which best practice indicates you immediately leave the area and identify or communicate that with a lead on site, and making sure that we do not have a potential asbestos exposure. They are very spiky, very fibrous, and very clumpy. So these things are a big safety hazard. So the more you are informed of asbestos and the more you know, the better protected you all will be as you guys are working through. So, um, really, that is the gist of our Muck and Gut PowerPoint today.